All right, we are live. I'm Greg Siskind. I'm happy to be back after being gone last week for some travel. We are doing Siskind Susser's weekly live stream, and I'm pleased to be joined by my colleagues Lynn Susser and Jeanne Santos. And I finally figured out on here, well, I have to find the thing, why the names disappear. We couldn't, I was on with Ari, I think, a couple weeks ago, and we could not figure this out. We had this banner up. Every time when the banner would be up, you wouldn't see our names, so we couldn't figure out why. Now we have figured out that if I click that button, it goes away and it comes back in. Anyway, so I'm glad to be paired up with the two of you there. I kind of joked when I was posting that there wasn't a lot of news this week. There actually is a lot of news this week, and it affects a lot of different populations, and it goes all the way up to sort of the rare, well, it's not so rare, but Supreme Court, which usually doesn't weigh in more than once or twice a year on an immigration issue. And seems like that's going to become a lot more common with some of the challenges that I know they already have the birthright citizenship case that's sitting in front of them right now, and they have been asked by the Trump administration to undo the temporary restraining order while that case works its way through the various courts. That would create a lot of chaos if that suddenly happened, and I'm pretty sure that the court is not going to do that, but who knows. That's there, and then there were some other cases that were there as well. The new cases involve deportation issues. So we wanted to kind of get that out of the way first, because that's the stuff that's been in the news the most. So there's the Maryland case, and then there is the Alien Enemies Act case, and they're kind of both sort of related. But I'll start with the Alien Enemies Act case, because we've talked about it here before. This is the case for the president declared an invasion and invoked the Alien Enemies Act as a way to basically deport in a hurry people that were that they believe are Venezuelan gang members. And that has been interesting because, first of all, I don't think it's ever been invoked in our lifetimes, the Alien Enemies Act. So this is kind of new territory for us. Second of all, it's only supposed to be invoked when there's a war. And they can call it whatever they want, but this is not a war. It's a law enforcement action, and that's it seemed to be the initial place where it was heard in Judge Boasberg's court. He said very much that. And then it went, so Judge Boasberg wasn't buying it. He issued a restraining order, and then he ordered the government to turn the plane around and send it back. The government claimed that they did. First, they claimed that they didn't get the order in time, and then they said it was a oral order and it's not enforceable the same way a written order is, and none of that went over with the judge. He had been in the process of, and he's still in the process of reviewing whether he's going to file contempt charges or potentially make referrals to the licensing board on the lawyers. There's all kinds of sanctions that the judge can take. In the meantime, the Trump administration managed to get the U.S. Supreme Court to take up the case and make a determination about whether Judge Boasberg's order was legal or not. And this was one of these that on first reading was like, oh, this is a loss for the immigrants. And then the more it's kind of going back and forth, and I think with an action that we saw today related to that, there's, I think, more of a realization that this might be a Pyrrhic victory is the term that's used in literature for the Trump administration, where the victory that they think they got is not what they got. So basically, what the court said is that they didn't make a determination on the Alien Enemies Act. They said, we're not going to make that determination because that is something that is we don't have to make that determination because this case was brought in the wrong court. It should have been brought in the place of confinement, which would have been Texas, because this should be brought as what's called a habeas action. Now, habeas is one of those fancy legal terms. Habeas is one of those fancy legal terms that means basically somebody has a right to go to a judge. Somebody clicking a button, or is that just happening?
I don't know. I see it, but I'm not sure where it's coming from.
Oh, weird. Okay, so the court said there has to be there's a habeas action, and that is that basically means that somebody can go in front of a judge and say, I'm being wrongfully detained. And in that case, they could say either I'm wrongfully detained because I'm not in a gang, or I'm not from Venezuela, whatever the basis was for them being picked up, or I'm actually not, I'm a US citizen. I mean, there's various things that you could say. And they can attack the use of the Alien Enemies Act at all, saying it's unconstitutional or it's improperly used in this instance. So that's where the court left things. And a lot of people said, oh, this is, obviously it's not as good as just basically saying Judge Boasberg was right, and leaving the order standing. But they did say by 9-0 that the court is that all 9 justices said that each of the people that are subjected to the Alien Enemies Act are entitled to due process, and they are entitled to go in front of a judge and make their claim, and they have to be given adequate notice and the chance to do that. That is all really important when it comes to, it's not so easy necessarily for somebody to invoke habeas while they're in detention. They have to get a lawyer. They have to go through all that. But it is important as far as, upholding the rule of law. And it is definitely not what the administration was hoping for, where they could they were hoping that basically this is something that wasn't subject to any judicial review or any due process, and they can just put people on planes and courts can't do a thing about it. So the Supreme Court said definitely that is not the case. And to kind of emphasize that they were serious, that wasn't just empty rhetoric. And a lot of people said, oh, these cases are going to be heard in Texas or Louisiana, and their judges there are going to be not interested in anything like that. Today, the first 3 habeas cases actually went in front of a judge, a Trump appointee in Texas, and the judge in Texas immediately, this is not the ones that are in El Salvador right now, these are new cases. The judge immediately said, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order for 2 weeks to give a chance to basically make the case and prepare for it. So that was like the more hopeful end to that case, because I think yesterday a lot of people were down about that case, thinking that the Supreme Court decision was just pure bad news. And it's not, it was kind of a mixed bag. Depends on, obviously, I think it would have been better just to basically say the Alien Enemies Act is over and it's done. But this is not this is still good news. And it's still going to make it a lot harder for the administration to basically do what they want, which is deport people en masse without having to give them due process. That's ultimately what they're trying to do. They are trying to deport people using expedited removal, which is where they say that you enter the country in the last 2 years illegally, and they don't have to give you access to the immigration courts. They're trying to say the Alien Enemies Act applies. They can put you on a plane. They don't have to give you due process. Everything is about basically avoiding courts for these judges, avoiding courts for the administration. And the Supreme Court case was one that said, no, you can't do that. The courts still have a role to play here.
Greg, in those cases today, were those also based on the Alien Enemies Act?
Yes. Yes. So this is going to be litigated. Now, what I think is probably going to happen is that no matter who wins, in these cases, it's going to be appealed up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers several states. Conservative court, although not sometimes the conservative courts are just as friendly on these kinds of issues as any other circuit would be, because they like they like the plain letter of the statute. They like originalism. They like to know what things, and this is none of that on there. So if they just read the statute, follow the law, look at the intentions of the founders, I think they're going to rule the right way at the Fifth Circuit. Which anyway, whoever wins that is going to appeal it up, and it's going to go back to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then the U.S. Supreme Court is going to have a thorough review on it. And in the meantime, the people will be detained for a while, but they're not going to be detained in El Salvador while this is happening. So that's the way I predict it's probably going to move. Is eventually it's coming back to the Supreme Court, and it's probably going to be. I don't know, it could be a June decision that we see if it's fast tracked. All right, so that was one of the Supreme Court cases. The second Supreme Court case, and you'll forgive me for forgetting the names, one is Garcia versus DHS, and the other is JGG versus Trump, I think. The one that they issued the full decision. By the way, that full decision case, before we get to that one, just to mention on that, there's a great dissent by Justice Sotomayor that's worth reading for anybody who find that interesting, but the lawyers who watch this especially, I think it's worth reading. And Amy Coney Barrett was sided with the three liberal justices on there, which that is becoming more of a pattern. With the women justices all voting together against the male justices. I don't know what you can read from that, but she is not a predictable vote as it used to be the case. Just like Justice Roberts is not a predictable vote on there, and that means that a lot of people have just assumed that because she was appointed by Republican President Trump and Roberts was that you can always predict how they're going to vote, and you can't. They will surprise you in a lot of cases. And there's always been a tendency with the Supreme Court to move to the center anyway, where justices on one side or the other that are kind of in the middle, they will start voting. Start voting in a centrist way, so that they're a little bit, reflecting more of the general population. Anyway, so back to the Maryland case. So the Maryland case that went to the Supreme Court this week was a variation on this whole thing about putting somebody on an airplane and not giving them any due process. In this case, it was an El Salvadoran, not a Venezuelan, who came when he was 16 years old, had been here 14 years, had no convictions for any crimes. He was arrested in 2019 for loitering outside a Costco or a Home Depot, which he was trying to find, basically day labor, which is a common scene around the country on there. But when he was picked up, he was questioned about gang membership. He said, I haven't been in a gang. He apparently was wearing a Chicago Bulls jersey, which is a dead giveaway that you're in a gang, apparently. He had a tattoo of a rose, which doesn't a rose and a crown, which apparently means nothing.
Well, supposedly they had to do with his soccer team.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not. There's no gang association with that, and apparently the soccer tattoos are pretty common all over Latin America on there. But that was it as far as he actually, his story was he fled El Salvador when he was 16 because the gangs were trying to extort his family, saying that they were going to basically conscript him into the gang if they didn't pay him off, and he fled the country. And so it's kind of the irony is he came to America because he didn't want to be in a gang, but ultimately he was sent back to El Salvador because they want to believe he was in a gang that he was never in. So when but the way this case shook out was the criminal part of it went away because there was nothing to it. And they turned him over to ICE, the police officers, because he was out of status at that point. And the judge said, I'm going to give you withholding of deportation, which basically means you're deportable, but we're not we're not sending you. You can't be sent back to El Salvador. It would be too dangerous for you. So we're going to let you stay in the United States until the situation in El Salvador is safe for you. So it's basically they could have deported him anywhere except El Salvador on there. That's kind of the irony of the whole thing, is if ICE managed to find another country to take him, maybe they could have sent him. So the Maryland judge said, you're getting back. We're ordering you to bring this person back by, I guess it was supposed to be Monday midnight. And the DOJ lawyer did not agree. He admitted to the judge that this was all a mistake. And the government was making the claim that it's like, but it doesn't matter because he's already in this other country and we don't have jurisdiction anymore and we can't do anything about it. So it's too bad, Judge, that this happened, but we can't do anything about it. And she wasn't having any of that because this is not that unusual where somebody who shouldn't be deported is deported, and judges have in many cases over the years ordered ICE to bring somebody back, and they always figure out a way to bring that person back when a judge orders them to do that. So she wasn't buying that. Anyway, interestingly, the DOJ lawyer, this guy Erez Ruveni, who is the chief immigration, he's head of immigration for the Department of Justice, the top guy. I'm just looking at this little transcript, and I sent you guys a snippet of it. And the judge said, can we talk then about just very practically, why can't the United States get Mr. Abrego Garcia back? And Ruveni said, Your Honor, I will say for the court's awareness that when this case landed on my desk, the first thing I did was ask my clients that very question. I've not received to date an answer that I find satisfactory. The judge cited that in her decision. And you know what happened to Erez Ruveni? He got fired.
Yeah.
You are saying for admitting to the judge the truth on the matter. So that's that's how it ended for him. The case itself went up to the Supreme Court the same way the administration tried to get the judge's order overturned. In this case, it was a little bit of a different. Justice Roberts said he was going to temporarily put that order to bring him back on hold. What we think is happening is that the court just needed a couple of days to basically review to review the court proceedings before it was going to make a quick decision on that issue. I actually am optimistic. I think he is going to be that the court is going to let that order stand. It raises things to a very dangerous level when it says that the government, if they manage to get somebody out of the country before a judge gets a chance to look at it, that is completely unreviewable. I just don't think the Supreme Court is going to be okay with that. That was also in Justice Sotomayor's dissent, what she was warning about was going to be a problem. Even U.S. citizens could potentially be sent overseas, and then the U.S. government could say, we can't do anything to bring back that U.S. citizen now that they're out of our hands on there. Justice Sotomayor warned about that very thing. And then, lo and behold, there was a story that came out, I think NBC broke the story. Well, they didn't break the story because it was actually quite public, where there was a question asked to the White House spokesperson about deportation of citizens, and I think they were asking about Justice Sotomayor's thing, and they were very forthright in saying, we think we have the right to deport citizens, and if they're bad people, we can do it. So there you go on there. That's where they're at in terms of their thinking. I am very hopeful that so far I've been impressed with the judges. There's 70 cases so far suing Trump over Trump policies, and the Trump administration is not doing very well on any of those. They have partial wins in a few, but losses in most of them. And the Supreme Court is not going to be able to bail them out on every one of these. They can do this, from time to time. And they're like, in this case, they wouldn't even bail them out on this Alien Enemies Act thing. All they did was kind of punt a little bit. But that's anyway. That's the Supreme Court news for this week. There was still other news. So we had been, I've told you we talked a couple weeks ago about travel bans that were coming, and there were 43 of them that were coming, according to the New York Times report. There was one that hasn't happened yet, but we did actually get a ban on one particular country, and it was on a different basis than the travel bans that we had seen before. And this involves the country of South Sudan. And that order was based on the South Sudan's refusal, apparently, to accept deportees. And there is another area of immigration law which allows visa revocations and other sanctions against countries that don't take back their citizens when the U.S. is deporting. That was the basis for that case, and they revoked across the board, which is also something that is the first time that law has been cited in a way that was done on a completely countrywide basis. So that was interesting. There was, I guess, it sort of made the sports world news this week as well, because one of the Duke basketball players is from South Sudan, and apparently was playing, had his visa revoked like everybody else did. And there were questions that some of the sportscasters were asking about like what this person's status was. Now, it is important to note that just because a visa is revoked, and I think we'll be talking about this a little bit more on student issues, but just because a visa is revoked does not automatically mean you're out of status in the United States. It could mean that that's what's coming for you, but USCIS has to actually make a determination regarding revoking a person's status in the United States. That's not something a visa revocation does. And people familiar with immigration law know that the visa is sort of like the ticket that you need to show at the border to be able to enter the country. That I-94 that you get actually governs your staying in the country, and USCIS manages your stay in the country. So that is those are those cases. Lynn, there was this weird email that was sent to a lot of Ukrainians this week. Do you want to say anything about that? I'm happy to talk about that if you don't want to, but there's not much to.
No, there wasn't much to it. It basically, I think, went to people who had entered the United States on the Ukrainian parole program, and it was basically, I think, it sort of said that their parole had been withdrawn or revoked, but then not long after it came out that it was a big mistake.
Yeah.
And so it caused a problem because initially
it was a mistake that they hit the send button before they were ready to send it, but it clearly indicates that they're thinking about it.
Right. So it came out, it put everybody scared everybody for a little bit, and then just like went away.
Okay.
But yeah, it probably is a sign that, that Ukrainians are going to lose their parole status at some point.
Yeah, and I think that, in terms of
which has kind of been expected.
Well, they've stopped admitting new people in parole status pretty much since day one. And they stopped doing that for the other 8 countries that have parole status. They've already, we're expecting them. The pattern is any of these programs that people came in that were Biden programs, whether it's TPS or parole, their goal is to get people out of those statuses and then make them illegal and then make them deportable. That's pretty much the order that they want to do this. And so the good news is there's litigation on a lot of these cases, a lot of these instances, and nothing really at this point is being left unchallenged with the Trump administration on these major changes. So there's a lawsuit about the Ukrainians right now that's already in Boston. That's filed by a good group of lawyers. There's a Venezuela case in California. There are other cases that will be coming in all likelihood challenging some of the things that most of the big policies have already, as soon as they're out, there's a challenge, but there's a few issues still to go. Anyway, so if you're in parole status from any country, but particularly Ukraine, I think you need to start planning for what happens if the courts, because eventually I think they're going to find some judges that are not going to they're not going to rule the way that most of them have ruled at this point. But one of those, I think it's still good to be prepared to have a backup plan. One thing I'd want to mention as well about these is, the challenges to TPS revocations, parole revocations. The president gets a lot of discretion to create a parole program or to create a TPS designation. And a lot of people think, well, the president gets so much discretion to create those programs, he must be able to end them, snapping with a snap of the fingers. And that is not the case. And there actually was litigation in the first Trump administration on his attempt to revoke the TPS status for El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. I forget the three countries, but there are three countries, and that Trump tried to pull the TPS designations, and they lost the administration on that. Why did they lose? Because the judge said, you have to show that in each of these countries, the situation is improved enough that it's safe for people to go back. And they were not able to show that. This was this was just basically done with animus, which is a term that's used a lot now by judges and by lawyers suing on these policies, which means you can't just remove policies out of spite. You have to actually prove that you went through this process and demonstrated that the basis for these statuses is no longer applicable. And he wasn't able to do that. So that will be that, and that was precedent, which is now something that the new judges hearing these cases are getting to look at and see how this was handled the last time it came up. So,
and Greg, to that point, I think it was last week, wasn't it, that the court ruled that they could not end TPS for Venezuela?
Yes. So they've extended Venezuela indefinitely at this point, and they issued this thing called there's something called a preliminary injunction, and there's something called a temporary restraining order, and they're very similar. But basically, that is when somebody asks the judge to make an order stopping something or an order to do something where if you wait for the case to work itself out through the normal course, there's going to be harm to people. And in this case, because TPS would be ending in the middle, the judge had to make a quick decision because if he didn't rush the decision, people are going to be removed from the country, and then it would be a moot case. So the judge, but you also have to show, and this is really important, that you're likely to win. The judge doesn't just say, I'm going to put a timeout so I can hear all the arguments. The judge reviews the complaint, does preliminary analysis about the legal issues. And if the judge decides this person is likely to win on the merits when I actually have to make a decision, then I'm going to put this order in place, stopping whatever the government is trying to do. So that's important as well, to give you an idea of that it's probably going to be ultimately a win for the plaintiffs in that case, and TPS is probably going to be forced to stay for a while. Now, Jeanne, this is something that is really kind of like not really an immigration law question, but is going to probably have could have the biggest impact on immigration for a while, and that is there was some leaking that was going on about, I don't know if it was leaking, just reporting that was going on from people around regarding USCIS and their and they're being doged. So a lot of people may know that the government has had that they've offered federal employees, if they resign, they can get a bunch of salary. They can get they're trying to create incentives for people to resign. And for a while, they were leaving the immigration agencies out of that, including USCIS. I had heard that there was sort of an email that was sent like in January to all the USCIS people, and then they sent another email saying, "Oh, hold your horses. That doesn't apply to us on there." But apparently, they are now getting voluntary retirements and voluntary buyouts for anybody at USCIS. So, Jeannie, what do you think that's going to do for case processing times? And we talked about it a little bit earlier this afternoon about this and strategies and all that. But what do you think when a client asks you, do I have to worry about USCIS at this point? And I'm not even talking in terms of like whether they're going to give you a favorable decision or not, but just in terms of like, are they even going to how are they going to are they even working on my case?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it stands to reason that, things are going to slow down even more. And obviously there's a lot of processes that are super slow already. So it does not bode well for, going forward. I think that's going to probably be more across the board that, we can just expect many more delays.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about like premium processing, for example, about if this becomes too big of a problem that they are going to end premium processing for a bit different categories if they don't have the personnel to be able to adjudicate in the time frame. Some of the new premium processing categories, they get a little more time. They got like 30 days, I think, but that's something I'm concerned about on there. So I would say file, there might be a reason to file sooner rather than later if you have something that you're getting ready to do. I'm concerned about that. I guess we also talked about, I don't know. I mean, you can make arguments about this, but e-filing is something that seems to go faster those cases because there's less data entry and human beings that are involved in the getting the case before the examiner actually gets it. A lot of lawyers have not liked e-filing because it's a clunky system. It doesn't connect well with our case management systems. It actually drives up costs, fees for clients when lawyers have to use that system. But I guess Jeannie and Lynn, we talked about that as well today. That I think immigration lawyers are going to have to probably be a little more open-minded about that system because that may be the only way we can ensure normal processing times for clients. Maybe that's sort of debatable too.
I think also it only sort of, that point is only initially that's what happened, right? So when they first put I-90s online, the electronically filed I-90s were much faster than the others. The same with N-400s for naturalization. But now that the majority of applications are being filed that way, they're no longer faster, right? Because now it's all the same one big queue. So I guess the same will be true with some other applications like I-129s.
They are offering incentives to cheaper fees.
Yeah, the fees are like $50 less or something like that if you electronically file. But there's also some limitations on it because H-1Bs is the thing that's been most recently added, but you can't file electronically if there's any dependents. So there are some like limitations as to when you can and can't use it. And it is, as you said, a little bit clunky for law firms because it means that somebody has to go in and hand enter all that data, whereas most law firms have case management systems where information is input into our systems by our clients and it autofills forms.
Sure.
So
yeah, I mean, I guess it'll be for some lawyers will probably charge a little bit of an extra amount because it's more work for the firm to be able to do that because their case management systems don't have the ability to
autofill.
So there's a lot of double entry.
Right.
If your lawyer tells you that they're going to charge you a little bit more for that, that's the reason for it. And I don't think that's something to probably complain about at the law firm. I would probably want my case to be e-filed, and I would probably be willing to pay a little bit more for that to the law firm, and you'll pay a little bit less on the government filing fees, and maybe it'll be a wash.
I mean, one thing that's great about it is if you're really up against a deadline, and you e-file, it's like, it's just there that day. You don't have to worry about FedEx or anything like that. Yeah.
That is true. That is true. Okay. There was news about, so we have an April 11th deadline for registration. And I know we've talked about it on the live stream before, but basically the registration program is one that you have to go in and enter some information about yourself, including your address and It is one that applies to a lot of different groups. But the one thing they have in common is people who've never been fingerprinted before in the process. I think is sort of the one thing that they all have in common. That is scheduled to go in April 11th, and Lynn, why don't you explain what the but is?
Well, the but is that there have been lawsuits filed,
Right.
and we're all hoping that, at least one of the courts will issue a stay until the whole, premise can be reviewed. But what is it? Today's the 9th, I think. So I guess
Yeah,
it's
so
going to
it's
have to
gonna
be in
be
the next
this
48 hours.
Yeah, it's going to be probably, I'm guessing it's going to be probably, at the last second. But good job, American Immigration Lawyers Association and American Immigration Council for filing that suit in a hurry. And we will see what happens. I haven't
The form
really
itself, though, is already available.
Yeah.
In the
I
electronic
mean, I would
form.
say
It's
that if
strictly
you have
electronic.
you might wait to the last minute if there's potential harm to you for filing that and just see what happens. But I guess if you're like Canadian or some other groups that really have no worries about it, or you have a 14-year-old child, but you've been
That's where we've seen it. That's where we've seen it. Our clients who are on H-1Bs and things like that are sort of readily registering their children that have turned 14 since they came in.
Yeah, so if you're nervous because of your immigration status, my suggestion would just kind of wait till the last minute on that. Yeah. We are not, we're being really careful not to tell people to not do it, because if the courts say that it's legal and and it is upheld, that's what the law is, and we're in a position where we can't counsel people to violate the law, but you should at least wait to see what the courts have to say on this, and we're going to know by April 11th, one way or the other. If the court doesn't rule by April 11th, then I think that's probably a pretty bad sign, and that the judge is letting it go into effect on there, and you probably can assume that it's not going to be a favorable decision. So we'll know in the next 48 hours. Other piece of news: we had the H-1B lottery is finished, and we don't have the data yet, but anecdotal data suggests that there was a much higher approval rate this year.
Or selection rate. You mean a selection rate?
Well, that's what I mean. The selection rate, that you got invited to submit an H-1B application, that your odds were better. So that was the good news on the lottery. Why did that happen? Probably for two reasons. One, last year, partially as a result of litigation that we were involved with, they flipped the lottery and became a beneficiary lottery, which is what we asked the court to order at the time. And USCIS said, "Well, we're working on something, Judge." And the judge basically said, "Okay, well, do what you're going to, we'll let you do your thing."
Done.
And they got it. The second thing they did was they upped the fee from $10 to $200. I think it's
$215.
Yeah, $215. Sorry. So that seems to have done the trick as far as people deciding it was a little too expensive to file endless applications on there. So we don't have the data yet on how many people applied. I don't think have you seen that data?
I haven't seen the data, but we did a little, poll amongst a group of, colleagues, and all the firms reported that they got somewhere between 33 and 36% of their.
Yeah, this is better than like 10% last year.
Yeah, so a third. Yeah. So if it's a third, and we figure there's 85,000 available, it probably means there were somewhere around 240,000.
Yeah.
300 maybe.
So that was good. And so far, the Trump administration hasn't messed around too much with the H-1B program. No. Thank you, Elon Musk. But we did talk in our chat beforehand a little bit about, it's common for people to transition from student status to H-1B status. That's a very common pathway for in the United States. And we are not we're not going to spend that much time talking about the CVIS record terminations tonight, because next week Adam Cohen, who is is a partner at our firm, who writes a book about university immigration issues and thinks about students from when he wakes up in the morning until he goes to sleep at night. He's thinking either about doctors or about students, and he's going to do a whole hour next week. Is he doing it next week? Next Wednesday night?
Yes.
Yeah. So next Wednesday night, Adam is going to go do a deep dive on student visa issues. So I invite you to come back next week for that. But we can talk a little bit about it. The news this week was the floodgates have apparently opened for SEVIS revocations. I don't know if the numbers of visa revocations is still going at the same pace it was, but the cases that we were hearing about this week are very different than the cases that were being reported on the news in the first week, which were mostly people that were being targeted for, being active in the protests on campuses around the country. This seems to be basically some kind of scraping of court records, and anybody who has had any minor brush with the legal system seems like they are getting a revocation. And some of the Lynn, maybe you can talk a little bit about what are some of the examples we've been hearing.
Right. It seems that what's happening is that they've somehow scraped the all the different criminal databases or law enforcement databases across the country, and are just terminating the SEVIS accounts for students who had any kind of minor infraction, including very minor traffic incidents. Even just speeding tickets, driving without a suspended license, like very minor things. And in many cases, the charges were dismissed. So it's like they're not even looking at what the outcome was. It was sort of a wholesale.
But I mean, even if they did, a person paid a fine for running a stop sign or speeding through.
These are things that normally have no bearing on immigration status.
Yeah, I mean, that's like unheard of for ICE to really even care about those particular issues. So that is Adam is going to be talking about like different strategies, like go to court or seek reinstatement, or apply for an H-1B visa and see if you can get you can get it approved, or maybe consular process. But you could seek a change and ask for forgiveness with the explanation going to the immigration officer. My SEVIS was revoked, but these are the facts. You're welcome to research and look at it into yourself. But
and the thing is that this also really took the universities by surprise. So usually the universities are controlling the people's SEVIS accounts to an extent, and this has really taken them by surprise. So the universities themselves are all also in flux right now, trying to figure out like what they can do, and if possible, can they reissue new I-20s? Can they help people to get reinstated? So I think there's a lot of that's going to have to get worked out over the next week or so to figure out which universities are willing to. The other problem is, applications for reinstatement are not quick. No. So for many people, it may be faster to, make a departure and come. It's going to be messy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that if somebody goes out and says, "Look, this happened. This is the reason why it happened" on there, and hopefully you'll get a consular officer who's like, "That's ridiculous" on there, and maybe get a break and get the visa issued. And my guess is that if the consulate reissues the visa, then it's probably going to put the issue to rest. I'm guessing that there'll be some deference to that decision since it came after the SEVIS revocation.
Right. The other thing is that we know for sure there are about to be some lawsuits filed. So it could be that by the time Adam speaks on this next week, there'll be a little bit more clarity as to
So what do we know about eligibility to file for H-1Bs for people in that situation? What do you think?
So we had a discussion about it today, and technically these people are not out of status and may be eligible for a change of status. So for people on F1 that were selected in the lottery,
I think that's not clear.
Right,
whether
I think it's
they're
not
in
right.
status or out of status. But you can be out of status and ask for a change of status if you can explain it's a service error that was the reason why you're out of status.
Right, a technical error beyond your control.
Yeah, and if you can say the government made a mistake, here's proof on there, you can try to get them to to get into another status and demonstrate that, and they will forgive you for being out of status for that short period of time.
And I think that we're going to have to wait and see what happens in regard to, how USCIS is going to treat this. But people who were selected in the lottery, a great majority of whom were in F1 status and on OPT, whatever.
Well, they need to finish their degree. That's a problem if they can't get their degree.
Right. Well, so those people who have, so it's interesting. A couple of attorneys I spoke to today who have university clients said that their universities were had already sort of messaged out that they were inclined to let people finish the semester before they departed, so that those are ready to graduate. But there's a lot of panic from the individuals themselves, the students, and particularly the students' families abroad.
Yeah.
Wanting them to not worsen the situation and encouraging them to leave because they're thinking that they may be out of status. So I don't know. It all kind of just started happening in the last week. I guess we'll.
We know that a lot of law firms have gotten a lot of phone calls. We've had several. I think I've had 2 in the last, 2 just today that I've heard from.
Yeah, Adam's clients are, burning up the phone.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So more next week on that. If you're interested in that issue, I encourage you to watch Adam next week. It's this time. The last thing I put on, and I keep sort of like smiling because it's I sort of thought it was a joke, but it's like with Trump, with many things that you think is a joke, it's not a joke on there. So President Trump has proposed this gold card, which is essentially you invest $5 million and you get a green card, and you do not have to create jobs, and you don't have to do all the other things that are associated with the EB-5 program. We don't know if it wipes out. I mean, we haven't seen a bill yet, but we don't know if it wipes out admissibility issues. I actually have a client that is been out of status for most of his life, like 40 years, and I think he registered to vote and has plenty of money to invest. If this would get him a green card, he would plunk that $5 million down immediately on there. But we don't know. But what we do know is that a lot of people say, well, why do we need a gold card? We have this EB-5 program. EB-5 program, maxes out. There's a lot of problems with that program. A lot of good things about it, but usually it's availability. That's the main problem with the program. Senator John Cornyn, who is pretty influential in the Senate, he's from Texas, Republican, on immigration issues, is spearheading an effort to try and legislate the gold card and do it as another version of the EB-5. So essentially the EB-5 program would stay in place, everything the way it is now, but there would be this other program that would be the gold card that would work basically along the lines that President Trump had proposed. And I think it is going to move. And the reason why I think it's going to move is because I don't think Democrats have a problem with voting for that. At least some of them will. Some of them will vote no, because they don't like, don't want to do anything the president wants. But a lot of them are not going to really care if it's not tied. If there's nothing anti-immigration in that bill, and we'll probably go ahead and support it on principle, which is just another expansion of the green, of immigration, legal immigration. So keep an eye on that. And we will see whether that goes anywhere. So we've been going for 48 minutes, and I'm through the news. And I don't know if we have any good questions yet, Jeanne. Have you been monitoring them?
Yeah, there's just a couple of questions. So one was from
which one do you want me to move over?
Yeah, I don't know why there's one. I don't know why they're hiding some of them. I don't understand.
Oh, hang on.
I can't read one. But anyway, one was about the SEVIS revocations and visa revocations.
That was from Aaron Hills.
That.
Is that this one?
Yes.
We have students revoked or SEVIS records terminated. So this is a question from the school's perspective.
Right. And I think that the answer for this, really is that your school probably already has a policy on reinstatement, on when you're willing to, and under what conditions you would support reinstatement. So I would say for the moment, you should follow that policy, right? You should continue to support reinstatement for students that you would have in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the question about, about if if they've had their visas revoked or CVIS record terminated, they should also seek counsel on there. They may need, because they may need to go to court if they are looking for a quick resolution, or they may want to seek reinstatement. Or they may get counsel to, with the, and it may, in some people, there may be eligibility for studying on some other category. Like maybe they have a spouse on a work visa and they can just change to an H4 or something like that. I mean, there might be solutions that are worth having a conversation with an immigration lawyer about. So that's probably what I would do. Hopefully you can get an appointment, because law firms have been slammed with phone calls on this and a lot of other issues. But that's probably what I would do. All right, Jeannie, what's next?
So the next one is from Naeem Abd, and wondering that when there can a green card holder with a reckless driving charge or speeding going on a cruise be stopped at a seaport?
Well, so here's the question that we've been, the thing that we've been seeing, and we just saw another case today where somebody who has permanent residency and then has some legal run and some run in with the law after they get permanent residency, they're encountering problems. And Lynn, this was, I think, a New York Times case that was sent around on our Teams channel today about somebody who had a relatively minor charge several years ago. It was kind of a sad case for somebody that was a caregiver for somebody who has autism, was being removed from something that was super minor that they had after they got the green card. So that's the first thing I would be concerned about is, is whether this reckless driving charge potentially. I would probably have a lawyer basically on call who's done analysis about the issue, who can make a determination that this is not does not rise to the level that would make somebody inadmissible. Probably not for speeding, especially if there was no injuries or anything that happened. It was just
no alcohol involved, anything like that.
So there are
those things, though, really reckless driving, even a DUI does not make a person inadmissible. So, but I think the question maybe really is, even if they might not technically be, removable, are they going to get hassled by the
I can
CBP? And I think that the answer is probably they might be.
CBP at the seaport is no different than CBP at an airport.
Exactly.
Or at the at a land border where you're driving through. They are supposed to apply the laws the same way. Now, I just went on a cruise a couple of months ago, and I can tell you that it seemed like it was a much faster, easier process than at an airport. But they did have a separate line for people with passports, and that they had to go through it. And if you're in some database, it's not going to matter how abbreviated it is. As soon as you show your passport and you swipe it, it's going to be an issue. So that
this hypothetical, by the way, Greg says it's a charge, not a conviction. So if it's a charge because if there's no conviction because it hasn't gone to court yet and it hasn't been resolved, then that's one scenario. If it's been dismissed, I would say carry the documentation with you that shows that you had the charge, but it was all dismissed.
Yes.
Or pled down to something lesser or whatever, but keep the paperwork with you. If it hasn't been resolved yet, then I think,
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I think that and he said no injuries or alcohol, which is great. So, I would say probably, again, have that conversation. Don't rely on in live streams on the internet for legal advice. And Ari Sowers always hammers that home on there. It's like, we are immigration lawyers. We are not your immigration lawyers. So definitely have that conversation. Bring the documents to the lawyer if necessary. Get the immigration lawyer to write a legal opinion explaining for a CBP officer why this is not an issue, but have all that documentation available. But if there was, if it did not result in a conviction, I agree with Lynn that it's probably for something like this doesn't rise to the level of something that should cause you to not be admitted or to lose your green card. But that's the other. That's sort of the law, and then there's sort of the reality, which is the way CBP is administering the law, and that's the part that's really hard for immigration lawyers to advise right now, which is that do you even want to be in the situation on there? And we have been just telling a lot of people who are perfectly fine that, you know what, you might just want to put off international travel for a couple months.
Yeah.
This is kind of a reverse honeymoon for CBP, where and we saw this in 2017, where for like the first 6 months of the first Trump administration, there were all kinds of things that were going on at ports of entry, and it was it's not that the situation became like, all fine after that, but we did notice that things settled down, and a lot of the excesses of the first couple of months were not as bad later on. I'm hoping that turns out to be the case again, and by the end of this, by the summer or the end of this year, we're not going to be hearing as many about these instances where people are wrongfully being stripped of their green card or denied entry and that kind of thing, the things that have been making the news. I'm also hopeful that there's travel warnings now in the United States for the UK, Canada, Germany, Denmark, Finland. I mean, some pretty major countries as far as sending tourists to the United States have put travel warnings on there. And I am hopeful that, I'm never hopeful that people are like suffering economic pain, but I'm hopeful that the pain that they are no doubt suffering in Florida and South Carolina and other places where they get a lot of tourists from Europe and Canada, that this is that message is being heard by CBP, which hopefully will realize that the zealousness is causing actual damage to U.S. citizens who depend on tourism. Also, we've saw like an earnings warning from Delta Airlines yesterday, and others that are already. It's already starting to happen, and we're not even getting into like tariffs and all this other stuff, but we're on here. But this is something that CBP hopefully is getting the message that their actions are having really devastating consequences for a lot of U.S. citizens who depend on tourism. So we will see. Jeannie, any other ones that you want me to pull up?
Yeah, well, there's going in order, basically. Question about the bill that's going through the Tennessee legislature.
Yes, I talked about this a while back because I actually went up to Nashville to lobby on this. It is still moving along. This bill, actually, there's 4 of these bills, I believe, that all sort of are a little bit different from each other. So I'm not sure what the final version is going to be. I think this one gives the option to each school district to make a decision on whether they are going to kick these kids out of school. Now, what I will tell you is that it is unconstitutional, and we talked about that. It's very unconstitutional. There's a very explicit Supreme Court decision that says that you cannot do this. The entire purpose of this bill is to get the Supreme Court to take another look and potentially reverse Plyler v. Doe, which is the case where that was decided 40 some odd years ago, allowing for this. So if this happens and this bill passes and Governor Lee signs it, and by the way, people are just like, you might be saying, why do I care about a Tennessee bill? Because this is coming to your state if you live in, the 20 or so states that have unitary government, which is same legislature, same Republican governor. So what will happen is that they will get sued. A court will block it. I'm pretty sure that any judge is going to see this as something that's going to have to be blocked. And then it will appeal its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And either the U.S. Supreme Court will say especially if this happens in more than one place, that and all the judges are sort of unified on this, they may say, you know what, we're not going to take this case because it was clear, and we think that there are no issues that need new resolution, or they will take it, and it may be next year, not this year, that that it works its way up. But that bill's a travesty. As far as I'm concerned, the Article 26 of the Declaration on Human Rights that was passed basically because the United States pushed that pushed for that and got governments from around the world to sign it. Article 26 says children from kindergarten through 17, I believe, any country around the world, that it is a human right to get a free education. And that is, and I believe that was one of the sources of law cited in the Plyler case. It wasn't just citing the Constitution; they were citing international law as well. So that still matters. Courts can still use international law, and I would hope that that some of the courts along the way look at Article 26 and not just the Plyler case alone. Okay.
So I know we're almost at time, but there's just one last question that sort of relates to a news item that I think we didn't quite get.
Which one do you want? Oh, we didn't talk about. Yes, I know the IRS. I missed that one, and I didn't mean to. I apologize, but there was some news today, and it started yesterday and it went into today. So yesterday, the commissioner of the IRS resigned. This is Melanie Klaus, I believe, or Klaus is her name. She was not a political appointee. She was an interim person. It usually means it's somebody that is a senior professional at the agency who's a career employee of that agency. She resigned because apparently she would not sign this agreement between ICE and the IRS to share information. And that took some courage, and I congratulate her for doing that. And it still ended up being signed, but by Trump's Secretary of the Treasury, Bessner, I forget that guy's name, and it was signed by the head of ICE as well. So it did get signed today. I did do some work this week on preparing a briefing on the legal arguments about this issue, which I presented to one of the organizations that we had already mentioned tonight that does a lot of litigation. And I do think that before this takes effect, that there will probably be a lawsuit trying to stop it. And the good news was there were a lot of really strong arguments that this is not something that's legal. The statute says the IRS, excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit, but the statute says that the IRS is not allowed to share private information except in some very narrow circumstances, most of which involve criminal justice investigations. And that does not, and the way that they're about to use it for deportations, which are civil matters and not criminal matters, is not probably going to stand up when a judge finally takes a look at it. So I'm hopeful that there will be litigation. As far as whether it's safe to file taxes after the agreement, well, first of all, we actually, in our pre-call when we were talking about this, I mean, we did some research on it, and it is a misdemeanor that involves jail time and a criminal and significant penalties if you don't file taxes. So as lawyers, our role is first and foremost to tell you what the consequences are for it, and not necessarily to tell you, is it safe to file taxes? Probably not. Is it safe not to file taxes? That's not the case either, because it could make make it very difficult for you to get an immigration status later on there. So I don't think we have a good answer on that question on what to do on there. I do think the reason why this stands a pretty good chance of winning in court is because for decades, the IRS has told immigrants, we are not sharing your information with other agencies, and please feel comfortable to file. And a lot of people relied on that. That might matter to a judge on there when they are hearing this case, and I hope it does. But I'm glad that this question was raised, because this was just happening in the news today. After the resignation yesterday, it did actually get signed today, this agreement between ICE and the IRS. Whether that proceeds or not, we will see if it gets challenged. So I think that is we're through the what we wanted to hit tonight, and we're through the questions.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell folks that we are we're the immigration bar is with you in the immigrant community, and hopefully this too shall pass, just like it did the last time, and we made it through. A reminder again, Adam will be here next week. Do we know who's joining Adam, or is it going to be him by himself?
No, I think that he's, I think one of the other attorneys from the firm, as well as he's having a guest speaker come in with him as well, a local lawyer named Andrew Rankin.
Oh yeah, Andrew's great. All right,
Yeah.
so good. So
it should be a good,
week.
yeah.
And Lynn and Jeannie, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and we will be back next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.